I'm pleased to have the opportunity that we present our outcomes regarding classification. And with that, I want to first start with these showing what FutuRaM is doing. Most of you already know, but still it is nice to know to get an overview. So first, it is about the availability of secondary raw materials. This is the basis of the composition and the stock and flow models used to understand what is in the waste. And in FutuRaM, we have in total 6 different waste streams, which are slag and ashes, mining waste. It is also waste coming from vehicles, electrical and electronic equipment, buildings and batteries. And in addition of that, wind turbines were also collected as an additional part. A lot of activity was done to have to develop a recovery model to understand the recoverability of secondary raw materials from these waste streams. And this was used to make projections along different scenarios to 2050. These parts were shown in the Urban Mine platform and was presented in the last webinar. Today, we will focus on this additional part. It is about UNFC, which is, it altogether builds the secondary raw materials and critical raw materials management in Europe. And with that, what is classification and why is it important for the recycling sector? So the big challenge is that we have a huge complexity in the waste streams. They are diverse waste streams. They are complex materials distributed in these waste streams. We have a lot of different technologies. They are initially developed to reduce the environmental impact of waste. And in the same time, now regarding circular economy, new approaches are emerging to recover the secondary raw materials, and now the focus is on critical raw materials. That means we have a lot of different technologies with different maturity levels, and it is struggling to keep track of all the ongoing activities, and all these different stakeholders want to understand how to work, where are the opportunities, and how to continue. And that means that there are a lot of challenges for the recycling sector. There are data missing to understand how much is recovered. There is a lot of activities in parallel, and there is no standardized approach to have a holistic view on these flows. And that is also the main challenge, that is insufficient transparency across the value chain. So there is a problem for all these stakeholders to take decisions. How to support evidence-based decisions for investment, for policy development, and also for sustainable management. So that is why classification is interesting, because every project is unique and it has to be considered in its own context. Classification system helps to organize complex issues. It helps to improve transparency of resource availability and recoverability, and it also enables to have a consistent comparison across projects and technologies. And that is what stakeholders need to make the right decisions. And that is as an introduction to the content of today. So first, Iman will present the United Nations Framework Classification of Resources, that is UNFC. Then Melissa will present our work to develop a structured anthropogenic resource assessment for UNFC, short SARA for UNFC. And then I will talk about the contribution to data collection for monitoring purposes. and at the end, also as mentioned, the critical raw materials contribution, which is important in this section. And with that, I hand over to Iman to present the first part.
Yes, thank you, Soraya. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the webinar today. I'm Iman Dori, and I've been involved in the FutuRaM project more or less since the beginning, and my focus has been on UNFC. Now, having heard the introduction from Soraya on the classification and its importance, I'm going to explain you what is UNFC in a nutshell, how it works, its relevance to projects related to recycling sector, and finally, why it's important for the recycling sector. So first, let's start with the definition of UNFC. UNFC stands for United Nations Framework Classification for Resources, and here is the standard and conventional definition provided by UNECE. UNFC is a resource project-based and principle-based classification system for defining the environmental, socio-economic viability and technical feasibility of projects to develop resources. So here there are two keywords, I would say, in this definition. One is resource project-based. This means that UNFC is used to classify different types of projects related to resources. I will show you shortly which kind of project it can be applied to. And the second keyword that it should be noted is principle-based. This means that there are fixed principles that must be followed when classifying a project, regardless of the type of resource. However, the way these principles are applied to these kind of projects may differ depending on the resource type. So UNFC is typically illustrated in a three-axis system, as you can see here, where each axis represents a key aspect of the classification. E represents environmental, social, and economic viability. F represents the technical feasibility, and G represents the level of confidence in the estimated quantities of the resources to be produced. Each combination within this three-dimensional space corresponds to a possible classification outcome. So each cube represents a class of the project that can be assigned to a project, and depending on its level of viability and maturity, it can change. So to classify a project, we should categorize the UNFC axis based on the assessment of the UNFC criteria related to each axis. So the criteria related to the E axis include environmental, social, economic, and legal viability. For the F axis, it is technical feasibility, and the G axis is for the degree of confidence in the estimation of product quantities. Then, based on the assessment of these criteria, we assign the appropriate categories to reflect the current status of the project. So here you can see the categories related to the E axis. So there are three categories for the E axis. You should assign E1 to your project if your project has shown to be environmentally, socially, and economically viable. If it is expected to become viable, your project, in terms of the criteria related to the E axis, then it is E2. And if currently there is no prospect to become viable in terms of the criteria related to the E axis, then you should assign the category E3 to your project. Concerning the F axis, we have four categories. Category 1 should be assigned to the projects that are confirmed to be technically feasible. F2 should be assigned in case there is a need for further evaluation to confirm the technical feasibility, and F3 should be assigned if it's not possible to evaluate the technical feasibility due to the limited data. It's usually the case for projects that they are in the earliest stage of development. And finally, F4 is used for the cases, for the projects that there is not any solid plan or prospect for implementing that project. And there is no study has been done with respect to the technical feasibility. And as for the G-axis, you should select one of these categories based on your confidence and certainty about the estimated quantity of products that are expected to be produced. G1 should be selected if you have high level of confidence in your estimation. G2 for medium confidence, and G3 if you have low level of confidence. But sometimes the estimation is based on the indirect evidence. Like in some cases, this estimation is based on some other similar projects that have been implemented before. In that case, the category G4 should be selected. So after selecting the category for each UNFC axis, the combination of those categories will give you the class of your project. And the standard order is always the category E, then F, and finally G. And you don't need to always write E, F, and G. Sometimes you see the class just as 3 numbers. So you should know that the first number represents the category for E, and the second number for F, and finally the third number is for G. In this table, you can see the most common combination of UNFC categories and their titles. So according to the combination of UNFC selected categories, your project may fall under viable, potentially viable, non-viable, or prospective projects. If there is not any plan for developing a project and you only had the initial exploration about the available materials in your intended source, you can assign the light blue class, which represents remaining products not developed from the identified projects. And just to give you an example about this last class that I mentioned, for example, let's say there is a stock of electronic and electric waste, and you just estimated the quantity of materials in that waste, but there is not any plan to extract the materials for those. There is not any plan for any project. So you can assign the light blue class to the source that has been studied. So one point that is very important to bear in mind about UNFC classification is that it's a snapshot of the current status of your project. So after any change or progress in your project status, the classification should be updated. And as you can see here, a project begins with the screening phase to see if a project idea makes sense. To proceed any further, we want to know if there is solid plans to move forward before spending more time and money. And if it doesn't make sense, then we stop, and just the light blue class that I mentioned before should be assigned to that resource that has been studied. Otherwise, we go to the next development phase and then continue to hopefully get to the viable project class. And as it's shown in the UNFC figure here by arrows, you can see that we can move from one class to the other based on the change of the project status. But it's good to know that it's not always going from the lower class to the higher one. Sometimes it might be that you go from a higher class to a lower class based on the new issues that come up with your project. For example, due to the change in the cost, maybe potentially all viable projects turn into non-viable projects. So we can have those changes in the classification as well, just so you know. To read more about UNFC, you can go to this document that is the standard reference explaining the UNFC principles. But in addition, there are specific supplementary specifications developed to apply UNFC to various resources. As I mentioned before, UNFC can be applied to different kinds of resources that you can see here. So it includes minerals, anthropogenic resources, petroleum, geothermal, bioenergy, solar, wind, and injection projects for geological storage. One of the unique features of UNFC, which I would say make it special, is that it's applicable to both primary and secondary materials, and it's of high importance for integrated management of resources together. So in case you want to develop a database that includes the information about both of these sources, anthropogenic and also the primary sector, UNFC can be very helpful in this regard. There are 2 documents that they were developed specifically for the application of UNFC to anthropogenic resources, the UNFC guidance document for Europe and a supplementary specification. The UNFC guidance Europe is more, I would say, related to the project related to the mining waste, while the supplementary specification is more related to the project related to recycling sector. Is still the application of UNFC, I mean, many case studies has been developed, including the case studies developed in the FutuRaM project, but its application has been like a hot spot and very hot topic recently because of topic like circular economy. I mean, although these sources are very useful to learn about the UNFC and its principles, they don't provide much guidance on how UNFC actually should be applied in practice or how, for example, the criteria should be assessed. My colleague, Melissa, will present you the overview of the procedures we developed in FutuRaM to facilitate application of UNFC for the recycling project specifically, and also the web tool we developed to even make it easier for the users of UNFC to use it for their projects. But before I hand over to Melissa, I just wanted to wrap up my presentation by mentioning some of the key points of UNFC. So UNFC is a globally recognized classification system considering environmental, social, economic, legal, and technical feasibility. It facilitates transparent communication of project viability and maturity to a wide range of stakeholders. So you can just communicate your project status with 3 numbers. So it can just give a very quick idea and opinion about your project status to your stakeholders. If there is more detailed information needed, you can share with them also the report, which it explains how you come up with your classification. As I said, UNFC is applicable to both primary and anthropogenic resources, including recycling and secondary raw material projects, which supports the circular economy by integrating these resources in the same framework. And just maybe as the last sentence or points in my presentation, it's important to note that UNFC enables the integration of recycling projects into global resource management by treating waste as a source under a unified sustainability-driven framework, which I would say it's the key feature of UNFC. Thanks for your attention. Without any further ado, I hand over to my colleague, Melissa. Thanks for your attention. You're muted, Melissa.
Thank you, sir, for that. Thank you, Iman, for the great introduction. And so now that we have established the conceptual architecture of the UNFC and identified this persistent gap in the operationalization for secondary raw material recovery projects, we turn now into a methodological response that the team at FutuRaM developed, which is based on the central question. This is motivated on whether we can develop a decision support instrument that renders the UNFC classification system that is reproducible, accessible across heterogeneous waste streams, and the diverse stakeholder context. And the answer for this is Sara for UNFC. There was, as we mentioned, this gap, which is difficult to apply on the secondary raw material recovery projects. On this, UNFC provides a snapshot of the project in question based on the results of assessment and evaluations that are already done as part of the requirement for implementation of the projects due to these subjectivity that sometimes exists, no clear procedure, and lack of harmonization. For this, SARA for UNFC is formally defined as a structured decision support system grounded in the triaxial UNFC framework, the environmental socioeconomic, which is the E axis, the technical feasibility, F axis, and the degree of confidence, the G axis. Its principal design, it's to bridge the operationalization gap previously identified, and also the absence of harmonized procedures, standardized workflows for applying UNFC classification for anthropogenic resource recovery projects. SARA for UNFC establishes a structured evaluation pathway that guides practitioners through each of the classification criterion into a system that is reproducibly in the sequence. This represents a shift from principle-based classification toward a more indicator-driven methodology without sacrificing the context of the sensitive judgment that complex resource projects usually demand. So there is this persistent limitation on a globally recognized classification framework, including the UNFC. So this is why the triaxial EFG model provides a robust conceptual method, which translates into operational assessment protocols, which have remained underspecified, particularly for the heterogeneous and data-scarce context of some anthropogenic resource projects. With Sarah for UNFC, we directly address this theory to practice discontinuity by operationalizing the UNFC criteria into a concrete web-based workflow. This transition is significant because transform qualitative classification into quantitatively informed, documented assessment processes that can withstand scientific peer-reviewed and also regulatory scrutiny. The internal structure of SAR for UNFC, it is mirrored on the three principal axes of UNFC. The environmental socioeconomic viability, the axis. The SAR for UNFC tool evaluates four sub-criteria: the economic viability, environmental viability, social viability, and legal aspects. Under the technical feasibility, the F-axis, we assess and address technological readiness and infrastructure availability. And finally, under the degree of confidence, the G-axis, the system interrogates whether the material quantities are robust, compositional, and whether they have quality or not to supply security. This structure between SAR for UNFC and UNFC is important from the methodological aspect because it ensures that each input parameter maps exactly onto a specific classification axis. For this reason, it maintains the coherence between data collection instrument and a classification output that is designed to produce. So how it works. SAR for UNFC is designed to accommodate the nature of resource project development, the nonlinear nature of resource project development. So this system, excuse me, distinguishes between the primary assessment context. First, a screening phase, in which preliminary feasibility is evaluated with some limited data, and then more data-intensive pre-feasibility and feasibility phases, in which quantitative estimates and technical evaluations are conducted with progressively higher levels of confidence. This phase sensitivity is critical as it recognizes that classification is not static, one-time determination, but a dynamic system process that evolves as project mature and as new analytical data become available. So the UNFC, excuse me, the UNFC code assigned at any stage of the project can also change. It's not a permanent designation, which is a distinction with significant implications for investment decision-making policy. Let's have a glance on it. The operational logic of SAR for UNFC is decomposed into three functional dimensions. As a process, it implements a guided 7-stage procedure controlled by a set of structural factors that ensure consistent navigation through each assessment domain. As a data intake mechanism, it accepts a diverse portfolio of inputs, such as project descriptions, quantitative analytical data, data source, documentation, and stakeholder identification, all of which are essential for the traceable and auditable classification. And after this, as an output, SAR for UNFC generates two primary deliverables: a formally assigned UNFC code, which is expressed in the EFG notation, and an exportable structure report that documents the evidence basis for each classification decision. This is of particular importance for regulatory compliance and investor communication, providing a degree of methodological transparency that informal expert assessments usually cannot reliably achieve. The key features for SARA are incorporating a suite of functional features designed to optimize both usability and scientific rigor. The platform intuitive web interface lowered the technical barriers to entry for practitioners with informatic expertise. Its application across multiple waste streams, from mining waste to electronic waste, construction and demolition debris, ensures a broad sectoral coverage. The step-by-step guidance mechanism minimizes assessor drift, while indicator-based evaluation anchors subjective judgments in observable, documentable criteria. So perhaps most consequently, from a governance perspective, capacity for automatic UNFC code assignment eliminates a historically significant source of inter-assessor inconsistency. Combined with exportable structure reports, SARA for UNFC produces classification outputs that are not only scientifically defensible, but also directly actionable for investors, regulations, and policymakers. The applications in real life for SARA for UNFC were 13 case studies. The scientific validity of any classification instrument is ultimately demonstrated through the empirical classification. SARA for UNFC has been meticulously testing 13 case studies spanning 5 distinct waste streams categories, which is mining waste, slags and ashes, batteries, waste, electrical and electronic equipment, and construction and demolition waste. This taxonomic diversity was deliberately engineered to test the tool's cross-domain generalization. And the resulting UNFC codes reveal the full spectrum of project maturity and viability. For example, the case study 14, the critical raw material recycling in France, achieved a classification of E1, F12, G1, indicating confirmed viability, confirmed technical feasibility, and high confidence in quantity estimates, which is the most favorable possible classification to be achieved. In contrast, several mining waste cases were assigned E3 and F3, which reflect a significant residual uncertainty in both viability and technical feasibility. So it is important to emphasize that these divergences are not failures of the tool. They are just precisely the kind of differentiated evidence-based classification outputs that SARA for UNFC is designed to produce, enabling stakeholders to allocate resources toward the most mature projects. And regarding governance pillars of the system, the long-term scientific and credibility of SARA for UNFC lies upon 3 fundamental governance pillars. The first is consistency, achieved through a standardized 7-stage workflow and harmonized criteria that ensures methodological uniformity across assessors and projects. The second one is transparency, operationalized through traceable data capture and clearly defined classification outputs that render the evidence basis for each decision fully auditable. And the third one, accountability, embedded through the structured documentation of expert judgment and the requirement to provide material evidence at each procedural step. So taken together, these pillars constitute that might be termed a scientific governance architecture, a framework designed not just to produce classification outputs, but to ensure that those outputs can withstand critical scrutiny from the full range of stakeholders, scientific peers, regulatory authorities, financial institutions, and civil society actors. This governance orientation situates SARA for UNFC within the broader movement toward responsible and evidence-based resource management that is increasingly demanded by both science and policy. And with that, I hand over to Soraya. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Melissa. Now we continue to look what are the outputs we get with this procedure and what we can do in the future. So one aspect which I hope you could see is the strength of UNFC. We have a common language and a harmonized terminology which can be used across different waste material flows. So and stocks and flows, that means for different resources. And that is, I think, a really strength of this classification system. What we provided with Soraya for UNFC is a systematic data collection systematics based on these 6 criteria under UNFC. And that is helpful to have a consistent evaluation and classification, and enables to compare projects in different settings. And that is what it is also the strength of that. So to help help the stakeholders, different stakeholders, we have to make a fact-based decision. That means, on one side, as Melissa showed, and also mentioned by Iman in the way UNFC is used, you have a code. And the code immediately says where you are, how mature your project is. But the second part is that you have a consistent way of looking at the projects, and you can see the key enablers and key barriers of the project which affect the project development. And that is very important to know that in a holistic way from the beginning, so that and that is where quite a lot of investment can fail if you have not this overview from the wherever you are. And that is the added values for the stakeholders. So one is the consistent evaluation structure across different waste streams. The other part is that you have, with the methodology we developed, you see which factors were considered and how they are rated. And based on that, you see the strengths and weaknesses of the project. And that helps you to see how to proceed, what has to be improved, and maybe also to develop further options to find the best one for your opportunity. And this way of reporting and showing the outcomes is very important. You have the transparency, and that is absolutely necessary to build trust. And last not least, you have a common basis for communication, and that is between the project. So it is important for the project developers to know where they are, where are the strengths, and also to communicate these outcomes with the local authorities, to have an overview about the project itself, and going to the details where necessary. And that is also supportive for investment activities and also for public bodies, which are quite concerned about the sustainability aspects. And with that, what can we do without, in addition to that? So if we map these projects in a region, so all of them show a snapshot of the current status. By looking at them with the code, you see where are the bottlenecks and flag the issues preventing the project development. You can use that to monitor them and to follow their progress. But in addition to that, you can use that to consider these in a larger context by looking at a specific system boundary, either the regional or national level, and by linking this information with the material flow analysis, we can manage resources in a way by having a bigger picture, and that is very important to understand where are the bottlenecks along the value chain, and to support strategic planning and prioritization, and also for informed investment and funding decisions. And with that, I come up with the last part. the Contribution to Critical Raw Materials Act. The point is that UNFC is mentioned in 4 articles and 3 where it is mentioned specifically also for secondary raw materials. It is one, Article 7, about application and recognition of strategic projects. And Article 27 is explicitly about recovery of critical raw materials from extractive waste. And the third one is Article 21, which is about information obligation for monitoring the primary and secondary raw materials. And here, our process can help to make it easier to address all these aspects regarding classification. But in addition to that, the procedure also helps to address additional contribution to CRMA. That is about transparent evidence-based classification based on the report that can be developed, to look at the sustainability and environmental footprint, to look at to have a concept, a clear way to address stakeholder engagement and transparency, and align all these activities with strategic project criteria. And altogether, bridging certification and classification to have a good way for resource management. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention, and also on behalf of my colleagues who did a lot of big job to develop this concept, and also all the colleagues from FutuRaM who were engaged in all the discussions, and all together we developed 20 case studies showing how it can be used on site-specific part and also on national level. Thank you very much.
Thank you for this very interesting presentation and all your work put into it. There is still one question in the chat that hasn't been answered, so let's see. Could you please provide real-life examples of how UNFC has supported resource definition in a manner that was accepted by traditional financial operators and conducive to securing direct financial support for such projects?
In this way, we have to say we started 4 years ago. The FutuRaM project started 4 years ago. And that's a situation, there was no idea how to implement that, how to do that. That was our activity in this period, to develop a clear structure to make it easy for project developers to develop to come up with the classification. And with that, we were in discussion with different stakeholders to understand their needs and how to do that. And our focus was to show how it works. So these case studies show that it is helpful and the feedbacks were positive. And now in the next stage, that is where we want to get in contact with the finance sector to see what their thoughts are, in as much it express their expectations. And we got in one of the interviews, there was the point that it is quite helpful if these expectations regarding taxonomy is considered, and that is one aspect which was in our focus. So let's see. I hope that we will get good positive feedbacks from the industry and also from the finance sector.
And sorry, just maybe as an additional answer to Philippe's question. So regarding UNFC has been used for classifying the project for the primary sector, I would say, for a relatively long time, especially in Europe. So many of the mining projects that they wanted to start and started funding and financing for the projects, they have been first classified by UNFC, and the progress and development was accordingly based on UNFC. But when it comes to the project related to the secondary materials, it's relatively new. And maybe one of the recent real applications was related to the first round of identifying the strategic projects in Europe, because as Soraya mentioned, one of the requirements for the application of projects that's going to be recognized as a strategic is that the classification in line with UNFC should be provided. And the first round of this application was done, I think, in November last year, and UNFC was one of the requirements to select the strategic projects, just as a real example of UNFC use.
Thank you. Do you have any other questions? Asking the audience. I think you can also unmute yourself if it's easier. Okay. Well, we'll take this that everything was clear. And with that, we have just two more. Oh, no, that is one more. How will you maintain the tool platform after the project end and finance its updates?
That is a good question, and that is also a big issue. We are looking for funding conditions to continue with the work. We see it is also very important for making it to use it for monitoring, because the concept is also you can use the principles to track the development, like strategic projects. And we see also the opportunity to have this consistent way of data collection. You have to know that our focus in the report is to look at to have an overview. So it is a short description of the project. And in background, you have a list of additional information which can be disclosed to those who are interested and should be expected to have are insights. So there are quite a lot of strengths to be used for communication, and we were looking for opportunities to do that. And we are working on the together on the proposal to continue FutuRaM. Hopefully we are successful and our tool can be maintained further.
Indeed. Thank you. Well, so while you are still thinking of questions, let me just highlight that we have another upcoming webinar in April that's going to be focusing on vFlows and our results from the past 4 years. But if you're also interested in meeting our experts in person and learning more of all 6 waste streams, then you are free to join our final event in May that's going to take place in Brussels. Yes, Soraya.
I saw that there was a question regarding Frisco. I would like to say that there's a bridging document about the primary raw materials and minerals and UNFC, which is used from the mining sector because they are used to have this own classification. But I think with this Critical Raw Materials Act, that is a way to bring UNFC in focus of all project developers and industry, and with that it will be hopefully the way to communicate the maturity of projects. Thank you.
All right, well, I think that with that, thank you all for your attendance. Thank you to the speakers again for preparing everything. And of course, you are free to contact us at the general email address that's available on the FutuRaM website. And we are happy to answer your questions. As said, you can join us in Brussels and ask your questions in person. Thank you again and see you in April.